I'd always been fascinated by the stories of Ravenswood, a town shrouded in mystery and whispered to be one of the most cursed places in England. As a journalist, I had spent years researching its dark history, poring over dusty archives and interviewing locals who seemed reluctant to talk about their town's past. But it wasn't until I received an invitation from a mysterious stranger that I finally felt compelled to visit Ravenswood for myself. The letter arrived on a drizzly autumn morning, summoning me to the town's old Victorian pub, where I would meet someone who claimed to have information about the town's most sinister secrets. I packed my bags, grabbed my camera, and set off towards Ravenswood, feeling an inexplicable sense of excitement mixed with trepidation. As I drove through the sleepy streets, the trees seemed to close in around me, casting long, ominous shadows on the pavement. The pub came into view, its wooden sign creaking in the wind as it bore the image of a raven perched atop a Gothic spire. I parked my car and stepped inside, where the air was thick with the smell of stale beer and decay. A figure sat at the bar, hood up, face obscured by the shadows. "You're here," they said, voice low and gravelly. "I've been waiting for you." They slid a folder across the counter, containing a single photograph of Ravenswood's town hall, its facade seeming to loom over the surrounding buildings like a specter of doom. "This is where it began," the stranger whispered, their words dripping with malice. "The darkness that haunts this town has been waiting for you." With those enigmatic words, they vanished into thin air, leaving me shaken and curious. I knew then that my journey to Ravenswood had only just begun. I settled into my hotel room, exhausted from the long drive and the unsettling feeling that I'd left something behind. As I unpacked my bags, I noticed a strange symbol etched into the wall above my bed. It looked like a cross between an ancient rune and a hieroglyph, and it seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I lay in bed that night, I began to hear whispers. At first, they were faint, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. But as the hours passed, the voices grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like people talking, but not quite. It was as if they were speaking an ancient language, one that seemed to be echoing through my very being. I tossed and turned, trying to ignore the whispers, but they only grew louder, more insistent. I threw off the covers and got out of bed, determined to find the source of the noise. But every door I opened led to a dead end. No one was there. No voices were coming from anywhere. It was as if the whispers were coming from all around me, emanating from some invisible presence that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. And then, I saw it. A symbol etched into the wall of my hotel room, identical to the one on the wall in the pub where I'd met the stranger. It was as if I'd stumbled into a waking nightmare, one from which I couldn't awaken. The whispers grew louder still, until they became a cacophony of sound that threatened to consume me whole. And then, just as suddenly as they had begun, everything fell silent. The room was quiet, the symbol on the wall seemed to fade away like a ghost, and the whispers were gone. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for anything to happen again. But nothing did. And so I lay back down in bed, exhausted, wondering if I just imagined it all, but deep down, I knew that I hadn't. I spent the next few days researching the history of Ravenswood, poring over dusty tomes and crumbling documents in the local archives. At first, it seemed like any other small town, a brief history of farming and industry, followed by a slow decline as the factories shut down and the young people left to seek their fortunes elsewhere. But as I delved deeper into the records, I began to uncover a darker story. The local church had played a central role in the town's life for centuries, its clergy wielding significant power and influence over the community. And as I read through the accounts of the church's rituals and ceremonies, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The language used by the clergy seemed almost unnatural, with phrases like the sacred vessel and the ritual sacrifice appearing repeatedly throughout the texts. I began to wonder if there was more to these practices than met the eye, if they might be linked to some kind of twisted cult or dark magical tradition. As I read on, I stumbled upon a series of cryptic letters and diaries belonging to a local priest named Malcolm. His writings were full of fervent zealotry, decrying the corruption of the world and calling for the purification of the faithful through fire and blood. The more I read, the more I realized that Malcolm had been involved in some kind of dark ritual practice, one that had left a stain on the town's history that still lingered to this day. And then I found it, a single entry in his diary that made my blood run cold. "We have opened the door," he wrote. "The void is coming." I didn't know what he meant at the time, but as I continued to research Ravenswood's history, I began to suspect that Malcolm had been talking about something very real and very sinister. I had been walking around Ravenswood for hours, trying to get my bearings and figure out what was going on. I had seen some strange things, heard whispers in the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I turned a corner, I saw a woman standing on the sidewalk, her eyes fixed intently on me. She was pale and gaunt, with sunken cheeks and dark circles under her eyes. But it was what she was wearing that really caught my attention. A long black coat with a hood pulled up over her head, like she was trying to conceal herself from the world. "Who are you?" I asked her, feeling a sense of unease wash over me. She didn't respond at first, just kept staring at me with an unnerving intensity. But then, slowly, she began to speak. "I'm someone who's been waiting for you," she said, her voice low and husky. "I've seen what you're looking for, the truth about Ravenswood, the secrets that lie beneath its surface." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I listened to her words. There was something about her tone, something that made me feel like I was on the verge of uncovering a terrible truth. "What do you know?" I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper. She took a step closer to me, her eyes glinting with a malevolent light. "I know what's been happening in this town," she said. "I know about the rituals, the sacrifices, the void that's coming." And then, just as suddenly as she had started talking, she stopped. "But I'm not going to tell you anymore," she said, her voice cold and detached. "I'm not going to risk getting involved with someone like you." And with that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowded streets of Ravenswood. I was left standing there, feeling confused and frightened. What had just happened? Who was this woman, and what did she want from me? I had been investigating the strange occurrences in Ravenswood for weeks, and at first, it seemed like every lead I pursued ended in a dead end. But then, I started to notice something peculiar. Some residents were vanishing without explanation. At first, it was just rumors and hearsay, but as the days went by, more and more people came forward with stories of loved ones who had disappeared without warning. I began to suspect that there was something sinister at play, something that was connected to the strange occurrences and rituals I had been investigating. One night, I decided to stake out one of the suspected locations, an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. I set up a makeshift camp outside, armed with nothing but my notebook and pen, ready to catch any evidence of what might be going on inside. As I sat there in the darkness, I started to feel a creeping sense of unease. It was as if someone was watching me, following my every move. And then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, light and stealthy, coming from the direction of the house. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as the footsteps grew louder and closer. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, its face obscured by a hood. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure didn't respond, it just kept walking, its footsteps growing fainter as it disappeared into the night. But then something strange happened. The footsteps stopped. The silence was oppressive, like a physical presence that pressed down on me. And then I heard it again, a faint rustling sound coming from inside the house. It sounded like someone was moving around, searching for something. My instincts told me to get out of there fast, but my curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. What was going on in that house? And what did it have to do with the disappearances? The snow fell softly around me, casting a serene silence over the deserted streets of Ravenswood. But as I walked, my eyes scanning the ground for any sign of disturbance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The footprints in the snow seemed to be watching me, their edges sharp and precise. I followed them to an old, abandoned church on the outskirts of town, its windows boarded up and its door covered in cobwebs. As I approached, I heard a faint rustling sound coming from inside. It sounded like someone was moving around, fumbling with old hymnals and dusty artifacts. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rot. Suddenly, I saw it, a symbol etched into the wall, its letters glowing in the faint moonlight that filtered through the boarded-up windows. It looked like something from an ancient language, one that I couldn't quite decipher. As I reached out to touch it, the noise stopped. The silence was oppressive, like a physical presence that pressed down on me. And then I heard it again, a low humming sound, like the buzzing of bees in the darkness. It grew louder and more insistent, until I felt like I was being pulled towards some unseen force. My skin crawled with unease as I realized that I was not alone in the church. Something was here with me, watching me from the shadows. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath misting in the air. It was as if the very atmosphere itself had changed, grown colder and more menacing. I knew then that I had to get out of there fast, but as I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The footprints in the snow were no longer just footprints. They were messages, scrawled across the ground in letters that seemed to shift and writhe like living things. I had been investigating the strange occurrences in Ravenswood for weeks, and I had finally found a lead. A resident named Sarah Jenkins had gone missing, and her family was frantic with worry. They told me that she had left her house one night, saying she needed to go for a walk, but she never came back. The police were stumped, and the family was at their wits' end. I decided to pay a visit to Sarah's house to see if I could find any clues as to what might have happened to her. As I walked up the path, I noticed that something was off. The air seemed to vibrate with an eerie energy, like the moment before a storm breaks. I pushed open the creaky front door and stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. Sarah's house was small and cozy, but it felt off, like someone had been living here for years but was never really there. I began to search the house, looking for any sign of what might have happened to Sarah, but as I moved from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And then I saw it, a message on the kitchen table scrawled in red ink. "They're waiting for you." It was a simple phrase, but it sent a chill down my spine. Who wrote this? And what did they mean by it? I felt a presence behind me and turned to see. Nothing. The house was empty except for the message on the table. But as I stood there, frozen in fear, I heard a faint whisper in my ear. "You're next." As the days went by, my search for answers became increasingly desperate. I spent every waking moment poring over ancient texts and scouring local records for clues. I talked to Sarah's family and friends, trying to piece together her last days on Earth. But the more I learned, the more questions I had. Who was behind the strange occurrences in Ravenswood? What did they want from Sarah? And what was the meaning of the cryptic messages that kept appearing everywhere? I spent hours poring over dusty old books and manuscripts, searching for any mention of similar cases or rituals. But every lead seemed to end in a dead end, leaving me more frustrated than ever. I began to feel like I was trapped in some kind of bizarre game, where the rules were constantly changing and the stakes were higher with every passing day. I decided to pay a visit to the local library, hoping to find some obscure text that might hold the key to unlocking the mystery. As I browsed through the shelves, my eyes scanned the titles, searching for anything that seemed relevant. And then I saw it, an ancient tome bound in black leather, adorned with strange symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the light. I opened the book, blowing off the dust that had accumulated on its cover. The pages were yellowed and crackling, but as I began to read, I realized that this was no ordinary book. It was a diary, written by someone who had lived in Ravenswood centuries ago. And as I turned the pages, I discovered that the writer had been involved in a dark ritual, one that had been passed down through generations of families in the town. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read on, realizing that I might be dealing with something much bigger than I had initially thought. The ritual was still being performed, and Sarah's disappearance was just the latest victim. But what did it all mean? And how could I stop it? As I delved deeper into the mystery, I began to feel like I was being watched. It started with small things, a shadow moving out of the corner of my eye, a sudden chill in the air that couldn't be explained by the temperature. But as the days went by, the feeling grew stronger. I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find no one there. The shadows seemed to be moving of their own accord, twisting and writhing like living things. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't alone in Ravenswood. There were others out there, watching me, waiting for me to make a move. The air seemed to thicken with tension, like a physical presence that pressed down on me. I started to vary my routine, taking different routes through the town and trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the sense that I was being stalked. And then one night I saw them, a group of shadowy figures lurking in the alleys and side streets of Ravenswood. They were like nothing I had ever seen before, twisted, elongated, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figures didn't move, didn't speak. They just watched me, their eyes fixed on mine like a predator sizing up its prey. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. I was left standing there, alone and shaken. But I knew that I wasn't safe. I knew that they were still out there, watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. As the days went by, the nights grew darker and more oppressive. The sky seemed to press down on me, casting a heavy, foreboding shadow over the town. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. And then, one night, it happened. I was driving home from a late-night investigation when I saw them. A group of figures, tall and imposing, standing in the middle of the road. They didn't move or speak, but their presence seemed to fill the entire street. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing with fear. The figures didn't flinch, didn't blink. They just kept watching me, their eyes fixed on mine like two cold, hard stones. I tried to drive away, but the car wouldn't budge. It was as if the engine had died, leaving me stranded in the middle of the road. And then, suddenly, they vanished. The figures were gone, but the feeling of terror lingered. I pulled over to the side of the road and sat there for a long time, trying to catch my breath. But as I looked around, I realized that I wasn't alone. There was something else out there with me, watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. I could feel it, a presence lurking just out of sight. And then I heard the whisper. It was soft and raspy, like the voice of someone who had been dead for years. "You can't escape us," it said. "We're always watching." I spun around, trying to see who was speaking, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to be coming from all around me, echoing off the trees and buildings. I knew then that I was in grave danger. Whatever was out there, it wasn't going to let me go without a fight. I had always known that my life was not what it seemed. The town of Ravenswood was shrouded in mystery, and I had been drawn into its web of secrets and lies from the very beginning. But nothing could have prepared me for the truth that was about to be revealed to me. It started with a phone call from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th and Main," a low, gravelly voice said. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me. I arrived at the warehouse, my heart pounding in my chest, and was greeted by a figure I had never seen before. "You're one of us," they said, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity. "You've been playing both sides all along." They revealed to me that the entity that had been haunting Ravenswood was not a mindless monster, but a being of great power and intelligence. It was an ancient creature, older than humanity itself, and it had been awakened by some unknown force. But what really shook me to my core was the revelation that I myself was one of them, that I was a descendant of an ancient bloodline that dated back to the earliest days of humanity. The entity had been watching over me, guiding me, manipulating me from behind the scenes, and now it wanted me to join its ranks. I felt like my whole world had been turned upside down. My entire life had been a lie, and I was left reeling in its aftermath. I didn't know what to believe or who to trust anymore. The entity's power was seductive, promising me answers and solutions to all the mysteries of Ravenswood. But at what cost? As I stood there, frozen in shock, the figure leaned in close. "You have a choice to make," they whispered in my ear. "Join us, and you will be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams. Refuse, and let's just say that you won't be leaving Ravenswood alive." I knew then that I was trapped in a desperate game of cat and mouse, where the stakes were higher than ever before, and I had to decide whether to play along or risk everything to uncover the truth. I had been preparing for this moment for what felt like an eternity. The final confrontation with the entity was inevitable, and I knew that I had to be ready. I made my way through the winding streets of Ravenswood, avoiding the twisted shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The air grew thick with anticipation as I approached the abandoned church on the outskirts of town. It was a place of dark history, where countless souls had met their end at the hands of the entity. I steeled myself for what lay ahead, knowing that this would be my last stand against the forces of darkness. As I pushed open the creaking doors, a chill ran down my spine. The air inside was heavy with malevolent energy, and I could feel the weight of history bearing down upon me. I lit a candle, casting flickering shadows on the walls as I made my way deeper into the church. The altar loomed before me, its surface scarred and bloodstained from countless rituals and sacrifices. And then I saw it, the entity. It stood at the far end of the altar, its presence radiating an aura of power and malevolence. Its eyes locked onto mine, burning with an otherworldly intensity. "You should not have come here," it hissed, its voice like a rusty gate scraping against concrete. I stood tall, my heart pounding in my chest. "I've come to put an end to this," I declared, my voice firm and resolute. The entity chuckled, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "You are no match for me," it sneered. And with that, it launched itself at me, its presence expanding like a tidal wave. I raised my hands, summoning all the strength and courage I possessed. The battle was on.